Hello, everyone. Welcome to episode 29 of ZK Live. My name is Zach Kenney. Today we have David Andreozzi from Andreozzi Architects on. This is part 2. Very excited. We had a very intense discussion on all things design and architecture. So I'm excited. We have David. We're going to bring him on right now, and we're just going to continue that conversation. There he is.
Hello.
How are you?
Good, and yourself? Thank you.
Thanks for coming on. I'm glad. You're our first guest that we've had back.
Oh, thank you very much. I appreciate it. I had a ball doing it.
So did I. I think we were just scratching the surface too. Getting to know each other and talking about the broad strokes stuff.
Yeah, I think there's a lot that we have in common about what we're doing. I mean, obviously, our ages are very different. I'm 59 years old, and what are you, 22 or 23?
I just turned 35.
Okay, but it's an interesting path, and that as I'm watching you, and in reality, you're spending your life sharing your expertise that you obviously learn from various people for free, and that's the exact same path that I've been on through architecture, which is trying to take, well, two things. First of all, trying to educate the public on the importance of hiring a designer, period. And then hiring a quality craftsperson, contractor, etc. But it's really about teaching other people within my field what I know and what I've been taught, so we can bring up the entire industry. I mean, I was taught that early on when I was involved. Mentioned earlier with CRAN, the Custom Residential Architecture Network. That was 15 to 20 years ago. And one of the first things that they talked about when they talked about sharing this concept of educating the public on good design, that it doesn't have to be just about architecture. It has to be just the importance of hiring good designers and quality craftspeople, because by doing that, the whole world comes up and we all benefit. And it really flies in the face of how you're taught to be, which is protective of your craft, protective of your secrets. And again, I'm seeing you doing that exact same thing. And I'm curious from your standpoint, how did you, I mean, because a part of it, you can say, okay, you have a billion followers, and so that's PR. But I don't believe that. That's part of it, because you could be presenting it a very different way, more directly right to your customers. You're presenting it in creating sort of a following, and I'm going to, the cult is the wrong word, but a group. You're being a shepherd in a way to the industry, saying, we need to bring this up. And I'm curious how you ended up starting on that path.
I mean, so I have a passion for craftsmanship. That's our slogan. But I think I was always trying to increase the quality standards, and I always loved doing high quality work. And there just, when I went to go try to learn more about how to do that, there just wasn't a lot of resources. And I felt like I was very alone in my pursuit of my craft, where that's not necessarily true for architecture. You go to architecture school, right? And there's a bunch of people that they're professors, and you get a degree, and there's these high standards, and there's a lot more to it. And in the painting world, I saw a very like a race to the bottom, and price was a big deciding factor. And I wanted to give to like the younger people coming up what I didn't have, and what I had to spend a lot of time and effort learning the hard way. And so now it's like, well, I have all these things, and I get better by sharing, right? Every time I share or make a post and I show something, I'll get feedback from other people about how they do it. So I've learned a ton by opening myself up. It also keeps my back against the wall. I have to keep getting better. Everyone's watching all the time. There's no slacking. So it's made me better. I've always done better when people are watching and the stakes are higher. So all of those things kind of fed together, and then you know, when more people are applying paint at a high level, now it's harder to find there's more people who are bidding in my range. So it was easier to sell work when the standards are standard. And when I do what I would call standard quality, or, you know, it's high quality, but it's just like some of the stuff is bare minimum stuff, in my opinion, but it's not in the industry. So when I would do my entry level estimate for a good paint job, not great, it would still be higher than most of the painters. So I think that the more, we just announced today that we're going to be teaching classes, and the more I can have people come, like I paid a consultant a lot of money to come out and teach me stuff, and I got a lot out of that. And so, but I had to really work very hard to seek all that stuff out. And now with social media, it's just, it can spread so much easier, that I feel good knowing that the standards will be higher. My company will do better as the standards go higher. Then I think the common wisdom was like, if I give my secrets away, everyone's going to come attack me, and I will have less market share. And what I do, I found that there's so few people doing it at a high level that I'd rather bring everybody up to my level. And if you know how to do painting at what I would call the standard level, now you know there's no way you can do it for half my price.
So what I would rather do is interview against 3 other architects that are as good as I am, or I consider to be in my range. I'm talking about it if a client is looking for what I do, which is either traditional or neo-traditional architecture. I would rather that project go to them than go to somebody that I would consider to be a B+ or C+ architect, even if they, sometimes for a lesser fee, sometimes for the same fee. But I do that often. I'd rather be competing against my own. And it educates the client. And I'm sorry, for those rare projects that you get, they deserve the best.
Yeah. And oftentimes, especially with what you're doing, like if you're a client and you're going to interview architects and you're looking to find a piece of land and build your dream home, you know, budget's not as constraining as in other situations, right? Like spending a little, like we talked about before, spending a little more money on the design and maybe cutting 500 square feet off the size of the house, I think ends up being a better final product than skimping on design and building this big house, right?
Well, I totally agree with that, but that's not the case even always in my fields. A lot of times people will look at the architect or the designer as being secondary to the builder. I mean, some builders, big builders, set it up that way. So they'll actually make contact first with the client, and then rather than go in as a team and have the architect do the true role of an architect, they'll actually make the architect subordinate and a draftsperson to the builder. I won't accept that at all for a lot of different reasons, and it has nothing to do with morals or ego. It has to do with liability. The architect has a certain role. Their job is to act in between the contractor and the owner, almost like an attorney. So that's my job. And there's also the whole rule that the person that's the first one kicked off the job, they're responsible for everything that went wrong. And so that goes back to my liability insurance policy. That's where things go wrong and you end up in court, which I haven't been ever in 30 years. So all of those things sort of play into what we're talking about.
Yeah, it's such a tricky space because there's a lot of people with a lot of things they want their agendas pushed, and not all the clients. I feel like we are like many people in our world. It's like education is the most important part for the client. Like my sales and marketing is all dedicated toward educating clients, and the more I can educate a client on the whole thing, the better it is for us in the sales process. And if you start to not have connections with the client or close connections with the client, and there's someone else who's trying to sell you to the client, it just gets really hard to ever have a successful relationship.
So and that kind of goes back to what we talked about before, which is providing the client options. So in what most of my projects, believe it or not, do not go out to bid. Now they're bid to subcontractors many times, but they don't go out to bid. They're built like a large commercial project. And in that case, the client is actually given the option, do you want to go with this person or that person? And we touched on that last time, is that if you have the possibility to have your number thrown in and know that this one's going to be 80, that's going to be 85, and you're going to be 117, and explain the reason why, and just give them the opportunity that if they're interested, that can you just have the opportunity to meet them, not with any expectation, well, then at least you're in the door. And then it's up to you to explain that the preparation, the coats, the longevity, the type of paint, and the things that you're doing are going to be more enduring. I'm making it up, but I'm sure it's close.
100%.
So, but that's what you need to do is, but the key is, and what clients I find, they want the ability to choose themselves whether to spend more money and be the ones in control, as opposed to you're stuck with this and this is why, or this is cheaper, and not being given the options to go with something nicer. I mean, that happens to all of us in life, right? You say, oh my goodness, if I had spent another 10%, I wouldn't be having this problem right now.
So that's like the biggest problem I run into. That what you just described is my passion to save these people who do want good things from that happening, because we way too often come in after the fact, and we're on a project right now, and there's $1.5 million in millwork on the project, and it's being coded horrendously. And at this point now, everything that's already finished, clients don't have the stomach to have it redone this quick. They just paid for it. Right. So instead, they're going to live with it. And these are things that just, if I had gotten in to talk to them and made sample boards before the project started, we would have been a no-brainer. And if they wanted to reduce scope and cost in certain areas versus others, and we could have tailored all of those things. But instead, there was no options given. There was just a paint job done, assuming that it's like painting is a commodity or something, and it's all the same no matter what. And now it's like, okay, well, how can we minimize the damage? And most of the damage now is emotional to the client. Like, how much can they stand to address and fix today versus where do they draw the line, have it done properly going forward, and then maybe in the future we go fix other stuff.
Right.
And all of those things, that's just comes down to the client didn't have any options.
Everything you said is absolutely right. I mean, rechanging the narrative and explaining, getting in front of the client and basically saying, having the opportunity to show them your product and your technique, that's your chance. And the reality is that you probably don't want to be working for people that don't want that level.
Yeah. Yeah. The problem is, I think there's plenty of times the people who want that level don't get given that option. And that's where I think stuff like what we're doing right now and educating the populace in general, I think my goal is hopefully in 5 years, it's a far more common thing to think about your paint job as being important and something to make decisions on, and not that it's just paint.
Absolutely. Let me ask you, tell me about the paints. I know some of the brands you work with, but tell me the brands that you would consider to be the higher end brands, and are there brands that are at that higher level that are made in America? I'm just curious.
Yeah, so I'll tell you that so Fine Paints of Europe is at this pinnacle. It's like way up here. It's the finest paint you can get. It's pure paint in the gallon. And then like the next step down is the premier level paints from the domestic manufacturers. So I think Benjamin Moore, Sherwin-Williams, C2, they all make great paint. And a lot of times I see it's not even that the brand is wrong, but it might be those brands unfortunately offer a million different levels and different types of paint within their brand. So you can go to Sherwin-Williams and they'll have, 7 different options for semi-gloss interior paint. So, and in Benjamin Moore is the same way. So that project in Westerly, unfortunately, there's some paint being put on this trim that is a semi-gloss paint, water-based paint, but it's not what I would call it, not an enamel. So it's especially important for interior trim. You want to have an enamel on your trim. It's a paint that dries hard. Most paint for most of time was an enamel. All the oil-based paints, they dried hard. So they were great for trim. But I'm not sure, you may have experienced this, but quite often you will. It's generally in rental properties or in lower budget places, and then sometimes where the paint job was done wrong, where the trim will almost feel soft and sticky forever. And in fact, I just saw an architect spec yesterday, and they had this paint spec'd on their spec, and it's just shouldn't be on a spec for trim. Now that product is fine for walls. I would call it a wall paint, because you don't need it to be hard, like as far as stickiness, because you're not going to touch your walls. But your trim, you're going to manipulate your trim, and the door is going to touch the door frame. And if the paint stays a little bit sticky and soft, it'll always have a little to it.
Right.
The difference between that, it's called Regal Select. Regal Select is a great wall paint, and it's a great standard entry level, like medium level paint for walls. But unfortunately, people think semi-gloss just equals trim paint, and that's not always the case. And so this is a case, that's a brand, that's a type of paint that just shouldn't be on trim. What you want is an enamel on trim. And so Benjamin Moore makes great enamels. Sherwin-Williams makes great enamels. Fine Paints of Europe makes great enamels. C2 makes great enamels. More importantly, I would say, is having the right type of paint on the surface. And that's a thing that if you went into the paint store, oftentimes the paint store will tell you, you can put this non-enamel on the trim. And that's the unfortunate, that's where you need someone like me that just kind of goes like, here's what to look for. You get what you pay for with paint, as with most things. And so I would imagine most of your projects, they are using high quality paint from Benjamin Moore and Sherwin-Williams. Right. And so you're good. What you really just want to make sure is the trim gets an enamel. It's on the exterior is where Fine Paints is really the star. A Fine Paints of Europe paint, because it's so high quality, will last color-wise and sheen-wise about twice as long as the best domestic paint will. So, like when I was talking when you were gone, like a lot of your homes and traditional shingle-style houses, they have a lot of trim, and then all the siding, a lot of times, is natural. So in that case, that's where I'm pretty passionate. It's like, that's where Fine Paints should go on the trim. Because when they paint that trim and they get 10 to 12 years out of that trim before they refinish it, repaint it. And then when they repaint it, they do a very simple repaint of a clean and maybe 2 coats of paint, very easy, no scraping and none of that stuff. Now you may have gotten you get a very long life out of your dollar. The value of price per year looks really good. And on a house on the water with just trim, that's very important. And that's the kind of things where, like, I think just switching your trim paint to Fine Paints and making sure your interior are enamel paints, trim paint. Those are like little things I think that should just, at least the Fine Paints option as an option for clients on exterior trim, I think is a very big deal.
Have you ever thought about, you could also do this being a consultant, but have you ever thought about like building a specification, paint specification, say for a generic shingle style house with white trim or dark trim, and provide 2 options for the architect to put out to bid? One option would be the Fine Paints of Europe, and then the second would be whatever 1 or 2 or equal would be the higher levels. And so by you creating this specification that would get into the plans, at least it would give it would be asking for an adult for the higher end. That's something that I would be interested in. I don't have huge specifications, but that would be one way to do it. I mean, because if I just say, hey, I want to try your product, I mean, I'm not telling you how many times to prime it, and I'm not telling you how to prep, and I'm not telling you all the things that you really need to be competitive in a bidding process.
Yeah, so I would love to. My experience has been, it's been tough to call an architect and say, hey, I'm a painter. Can I come in and audit your paint spec? I would love to be able to do that and get open arms. Yeah, come on in. We'd love to have you audit our paint spec. I just haven't had that option. I haven't had that opportunity yet. I would love.
Why don't we, I mean, what are we talking about? 5 pages long or something? I mean,
like less than that. Yeah, a couple pages, really.
So why don't we create it together, a white paper or an open source document that you can share. So, and again, it has to be, not with your card and my card on it. It has to be an open source document that says, okay, your options are A, the Mercedes-Benz, and B, the Acura. I mean, so you have the 2 levels, but at least it puts your name in there. And you might even have a paragraph that describes the positives and negatives of the Mercedes-Benz. And so once you create this, and it again becomes open source and people can share it, and maybe people watching this are sharing it, now people are able to read something and, again, educate themselves.
I love it. Let's do it. I think that's brilliant.
Awesome. See, educating the customer. That's how we started.
Yeah, it's any way to just give, like you said, I don't need my name on that document. Any way to give good information to people is better for anyone who's doing a good job.
And just like if that specification gets in somebody else's hand, and they go to that upper level, there's only 3 or 4 people that are even doing that product. And it's the same thing with me. I mean, generally, if somebody's doing a custom shingle style house or traditional house in Rhode Island and they start doing research, there's a group of 3 or 4 people that basically will, come to in the same range for competitivity, be competitive together.
Yeah, yeah. I love that. And the more guidance, because I've often said the quality has to become top down. Like the designer and the architect have to specify some level of quality, or otherwise you're asking the GC and the subcontractor to hopefully do it. Where like you don't do that with anything else. Like so many other things just have standards to them, right? There's an engineer that has to put a stamp on something. You don't rely on the framer to decide if it's up to snuff. And it's just, I think it's just there's this big overall thing of painting has just been painting. Because a long time ago, the painters were highly skilled craftspeople, and the paint companies hadn't came out with a bunch of really low grade paint. And the industry wasn't like chasing the lowest price all the time. It was a craft, and there was an apprenticeship, and there was a lot higher standard on average. And I think part of what Sherwin-Williams and Benjamin Moore have done by offering by racing to the prices of paint being important, they've eroded this institutional knowledge or the standards. And so now it's almost becoming a thing where, yeah, we should look at the paint spec and write a universal paint spec. Because, I mean, and a lot of times you see the architect's paint spec might be, 10, 15 years old. And it's like they have a lot of other things on their plate. If we can take that off their plate and go like, here's some updated paint spec, as a standard, just a basic thing. Because my industry is changing so fast, like many of them, right? The insulation's changing, and the water barriers, and everything's changing all the time. And I think it is my responsibility and the painter's responsibility to be advocates for ourselves and for the quality of the trade.
So the two of the big things that people are looking at right now, I'm with a group nationally looking at this sort of future of design, and it's regionally based, culturally based, irrespective of style. But the thing is it's also, we were talking about it today in a conference call, it's about resilience. That's really sort of the new word, and it's thinking about focusing people to think about how long things are going to last when you buy them. We talked about this a little bit last time. Sarah Suzanka wrote this book 2 decades ago, encouraging people to spend money on quality rather than size. Now, and I brought up this point today, is that when you go to a contractor, not you, but when an owner goes to a contractor and says, what kind of roof should I put on? And I'm talking about a standard asphalt roof, not a wood roof that I really want on, but an asphalt roof. So what do they say? They say, well, you can get a 25-year and that'll cost you this, or you can get a 30-year and that'll cost you this, or you get a 40-year and what's the difference? Well, you know, the hurricane this and that and endurance. Now think about this. Think about how that industry has captured the concept of resilience and made it part of the actual purchasing process, where they say, well, give me the options as to why I should consider the more expensive product. And so what I was saying on this conference call today is that maybe what we need to do is reset that whole narrative and have people think about other products. So rather than thinking about disposable things where you can buy X or Y and that doesn't have a quality difference, maybe people need to think about and say, well, what things should I really be spending my money on? What are the priorities? That, again, the key that people are missing or don't think about is to have a higher resale value in 20 to 25 years when you're going to sell your house. Well, why does the paint? Well, because it's going to protect the wood. It's not going to be rotted. I'm talking about 20 to 25 years. So all of those things are incredibly important. So I don't know. It's a crazy thought, but resilience.
Well, I think that goes really against where we've been going for so long. Like,
Totally. It's all about doing things cheaper. It's about getting a bonus from the house. It's about contractors putting bricks only on the front just to sell the house and putting cheap windows in because people don't know the difference and don't care. And the cheapest, because I don't want to say this disrespectfully, because until you're taught, you don't know. You don't even know to ask the questions. All you know is you say, I want a commercial oven, okay? And I want a commercial refrigerator. There's a good one. I want a commercial refrigerator. Okay, you want a commercial refrigerator, you can get we talked about, you can get a Sub-Zero for $8,000 to $10,000, or you can get an upgraded knockoff for $7,000 to $8,000. And there's a big difference between the two if you're going to go up at that level. But no one's there to actually educate you. So how do you educate the people? Anyway, it goes back to that white paper that I talked about. How do you get that information out to the public? And where you don't feel like you're being sold by an individual paint manufacturer. Because and I know a bunch of them, and they're very friendly, and they're all wonderful, but like you have to assume that that's coming biased. You need to be getting this needs to be delivered, again, as an open source document. Maybe it's an open source website about painting where you go to and you basically allow architects and the public to educate themselves without actually selling anything.
I love that.
Education.
Yeah, it's just here's the information. Do with it what you wish, but understand there are options here. Like somebody just said, most painters don't even know the options, never mind being able to give them to the client.
Well, especially just what you described. I mean, I know the Mercedes-Benz and I know the upper level because those are the two products I use. But you start talking about these 7 other levels that are available, and then discounts and painters getting deals and things being like, your head starts to spin. It's just too much information. Unless you have your level of knowledge or the level of knowledge of people on this call, you don't really even you don't even know how to process that information.
There are a number of, so for example, I'm sure Taylor Swift's not watching, so we can say this. I know that Taylor Swift's house, obviously crazy home down in Westerly, there is commercial grade Promar 200 paint on all her walls. She has like the cheapest paint, some of the cheapest paint you can put on walls from Sherwin-Williams. That's all over that house. And that happens on many, many high-end custom homes where the painter these bigger painting companies, they just switch out to, oh, it's eggshell? Great, Promar 200, which is like commercial grade, low grade paint. And nobody knows the difference. And no one's watching.
So that's an interesting discussion. It'd be interesting. I mean, I'm sorry you brought the name up because I don't want to.
Oh,
no. In this case, but it's that therein lies the difference between working with a contractor and an architect in sort of a high quality cost plus relationship where their clients are given options and part of the process and educated as to what's going on, as opposed to either the contractor doing it for a bid and then taking the cheapest bid, putting it on their bid, they win the bid now, then they go back and go, give me another 10 grand. I want you to take 10 grand off. And they go, okay, good. So now the contractor puts another 10 grand in their pocket. Please, this has nothing to do with the house that we were talking about before. But that's the nature of the construction process, is to figure out how you can make money at the lower level to survive. And the alternative process, which is being transparent and letting the owner be part of the process, is really the best way. I mean, the way I do it is that there's a spreadsheet at the very beginning, and I sit down with a contractor right after schematic design is done, and we fill in everything, and 60,000 for outside paint, 30,000 for inside, whatever it is, high gloss, lacquer, library, add 30. And so we're building this thing and we don't even know what it is, but at least the very first spreadsheet that client gets has a realistic numbers that are within a range, that within a quality that they're really going to want at the end.
And that's the beauty of like what you're describing, which I don't think happens, in my experience, doesn't happen that as often, is you already have a contractor chosen. A lot of times where we don't do any work is where the contractor is bidding the project against two other contractors. Well, now he puts in ridiculous budgets that are for the bare minimum for paint. And then if he does win that job, now he's gone in there and his paint budget is not anywhere near what it could or should be for what the client might actually want. So that's, I think, just a messed up, like the whole system is not awesome right there. But again, if we have this spec from the architect that's very clear on what the paint spec is, now people's feet get held to the fire and that might stop happening as much.
Right.
But I think it's good the way that you were talking about, like you have your GC set up, the clients pick the GC, and now they get to work together to give them what they want. But I stopped doing it, but I used to do bids for GCs who were bidding against other GCs. And eventually they were like, I can't do this. You're making me lose these bids. Right. And it's like, yeah, well, I'm giving you an honest number. And these guys are giving you numbers that when the client gets it, they're not happy.
Right.
But they're just doing their game to get in. And then we all know all the projects who start with a $2 million budget, the guy wins it, and then he ends up being the 3.2 what the other guy was from the start.
Right. I'm laughing because I don't know Paint Wizards 1, but I'm waiting for the word kickbacks to go away so I can stop looking at the word. I'm kidding. I mean, hey, that's the reality at some levels that happens in the back. I mean, it's the beauty of why, if you can get yourself in these team atmospheres, working with groups that work for the client on their behalf, as their guardians, then what happens is that you have an architect who's your guardian. You really have a builder, and these are the builders that I work with. I adore. I mean, they're your guardians, and they're hiring subcontractors that they're treating fairly. And I mean, and those subcontractors are the contractors that are, you know what, I'll do it over again. You know what, that's on me. And so you're getting the whole team from top to bottom that's working on behalf of a client. And I tell clients this in the beginning. I mean, and I used to bid work a long time ago, but I'll say, if you had to bid all the work and if you could pick up 5%, for whatever the number is, 5%, okay, if I told you for that extra 5% that your project would be 10% better, would you pay the 5%? And they go, yeah. So maybe that's the model you should be using, is cost plus, or something, some derivative of that, because there are derivatives, but basically totally transparent pricing where the client gets every receipt and every gallon of paint and, you know, paintbrush, and everything is going in these files. You have to see some of the requisitions of payment I get. They're like this thick. Dave Rizzolo, I don't know, I haven't seen him whether he's on today, but I mean, he's the guy that's shuffling through those and has to get them out quickly so the contractor can get paid. They're massive.
And that's where I think T&M is what we would call it in my world, time and materials. We do find that that's it's tough for clients to wrap their heads around T&M for paint.
See, but okay, so I agree. If it's just T&M period, I don't know if I could swallow that. But if you said to me, listen, we're going to do this T&M, but it's going to be somewhere between $12,000 and $15,000 to repaint your first floor, and and you came in at 13 or 15.2, or that's making them part of the process. And but you're still not, think about what you'd be losing if it took you $15,000 worth of labor, but you gave a price of $12,500. I mean, that's ridiculous. But by the client, and that goes back to that 5 or 10% that I'm talking about. When the client is part of the process and you say, listen, there's a range here. Now you have to be responsible for that range. I mean, you have to big boy too. You can't say it's going to be 12 to 15%, $120,000 to $150,000, and have it come in at 225. Then you've lost all respectability. You're not going to get a recommendation, and my whole theory doesn't work. But if you can sit down and go, okay, I think I can be in this range, and you end up in that range or close to it, or if you're a little over, you own that range, then that helps you for the next job. When you meet the next one down the street, go, call up this one I just did it for, and they're going to go, they never complained about anything. Every time he came back for a little touch up, it was, so it's setting yourself on a different level.
Yeah. I think my experience is the one tough part about that I've ran into is, like you just said, if I'm going to do my T&M budget will be a higher number than my hard number budget. In that, like, I don't know.
That's counterintuitive. Because it would seem to me that if you had to come in with a fixed number, you'd have to protect yourself from losing money. Time and material, and you're giving a range, that range is your buffer. So
my point is, like, why would I give a T&M budget for less than my hard number budget? Like, I'm covering if I go over on my hard number by giving you.
We're saying the same thing. I'm sorry.
Yeah, but we have 1:23 left on this hour, and I've gotten cut off before and lost it. So I'm going to end this, and we'll start right back real quick.
Okay. Thank you. If you still want me.
Yes, absolutely. We're just getting started.